I'd like to welcome everybody here today, especially the members of the public. We'll move on to first item, which is apologies for absence.
Chairman, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Brooks, Councillor Mrs Bowkett, Councillor Cullen, Councillor Kirk and Councillor Mrs Newton.
Councillors Linda and Ray Wooten and Councillor Mark Whittington are likely to be late because of a prior meeting, but they will be.
Thank you, that will be noted. Move on to declarations of councillors' interest. Councillors are reminded that they need to disclose any interest, but if it has already been recorded, then they don't need to mention it again at today's meeting. Move on to item number 3, minutes of the meeting of the County Council. All right.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a pecuniary interest in agenda item number 9, so I shall leave the room when it's brought forward.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got item number 4. I need to disclose an interest because that's the petition concerning the animal rendering plant at Norton Disney, and I sit on the NKDC Planning Committee, and I attended a pre-app meeting about this proposal, so I'm declaring it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. Also on agenda item 5, the animal rendering plant. As executive member for Development Management at North Kesteven District Council, I chaired a pre-application forum that heard the animal rendering plant, as it's not a decision-making body for that, because it comes to this authority, but I just, for matters of openness and transparency, I thought I'd better mention that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Likewise, I also attended the pre-application meeting to hear about that application at North Kesteven District Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, we'll move on to minutes of the meeting of the County Council held on the 15th of September 2017. That the minutes of the meeting of the County Council held on the 15th of September be approved as a correct record and signed by myself later. All those in agreement? Any against or amendments? Right, I'll sign those minutes off after this meeting. We'll move on to the next item, submission of petitions. We have 2 petitions coming for the Council today. The first petition is requesting that the County Council resurfaces St Bernard's Avenue in Louth, and Councillor Ross Jackson for East Lindsey District Council may speak for no longer than 5 minutes and then present the petition to me.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you. St Bernard's Avenue is one of Louth's main arteries. It connects the town with major residential estates, with the Meridian Leisure Centre, and it's close to both the Lacey Gardens Primary School and the combined police, fire and ambulance stations on Eastfield Road. Sorry. The road is in Trinity Ward, where 258 houses are either currently being built or have planning permission for building. In Louth as a whole now, 1,187 homes are either being built or have existing planning permissions, and hundreds of other homes are proposed. So St Bernard's Avenue will only get busier. The road is built over concrete bays which are disintegrating. Although about a third of the road was restored recently and is smooth, the remaining 2/3 is pitted with holes which need frequent repairs. These short-term fixes last only a couple of months at most before they need to be done again. There are many negative effects of this neglect. Some residents of St Bernard's Avenue have told me their whole houses shake when large vehicles drive past over potholes. Some people with medical conditions, which mean some people have medical conditions, which mean driving across an uneven road is agony. If some are prevented from travelling as a result, that is discriminatory. The pitted road presents a bad image of Louth, and this negative perception is detrimental to local tourism. And then there's the cost of vehicle repair. I've spoken to many locals who have spent hundreds or even low thousands of pounds on repairing their vehicle as a result of driving over potholes. To quote one petition signatory, Steve D., "I'm signing this because as a cyclist, this road has already cost me a wheel. The only place to ride a bike to avoid the potholes is down the middle of the road." Sometimes drivers will be able to claim from the council, but more often not. So don't say there's no money. Whether it's the council paying or individual drivers and cyclists, somebody always foots the bill for these repairs. However, some things can't be fixed with money. Cyclists risk ploughing into oncoming traffic when they swerve to avoid the holes, or coming off their bikes and injuring themselves if they don't. In 2015, at least 46 cyclists were killed or seriously injured as a result of unsafe road surfaces in the UK. The persistent potholes on St Bernard's Avenue make this busy route far more dangerous than it should be. As county councillors, many of your decisions are life or death, and the highways portfolio is no exception. 860 people signed this petition asking you to resurface this road properly. So I'll finish with a plea. Don't leave it another 2 years or longer. Don't let the next tragic statistic happen on your watch. Thank you.
Would you like to bring the petition down for me? The Chief Executive has determined that the petition requesting Lincolnshire County Council resurface St Bernard's Avenue, Louth, be referred to the Executive Councillor for Highways and Transport and IT. We move on to the second petition now. The Council has received a petition requesting that Lincolnshire County Council take account of community concerns within the Witham Valley Park area regarding the proposal by Lincoln Proteins Limited to build an animal rendering plant at Norton Disney. Can I remind councillors at this point that providing they do not wish to speak, then there is no need to declare any interest after the petition. I'm going to now ask Ollie Hoosmeyer to speak for no longer than 5 minutes and then present the petition to myself. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking on behalf of the Witham Valley Park Preservation Group, working together to oppose the proposed rendering plant at Norton Disney. We believe that there is no valid reason for the proposed factory to be situated on this greenfield site. Information provided by Lincoln Proteins to date has been inconsistent, contradictory and incomplete. This is a speculative proposal as LP have neglected their site and breached their contractual duties as a tenant at Skellingthorpe. 2 weeks ago, they were taken to the High Court in London by their landlord, the Leo Group. LP have publicly stated that they intend to continue operations at Skellingthorpe. If they do not, their competitor landlord certainly will. This will mean 2 rendering plants in Lincolnshire within a 10-mile radius, processing national waste, and despite the UK Renderers Association saying the industry carries spare capacity. Lincoln Proteins are currently the only UK renderer not a member of the UK Renderers Association. We believe that they've failed to properly consider alternative brownfield sites which would be better suited for this purpose. The 35-acre brownfield Skellingthorpe site sold for in excess of £6.5 million. Gary Hancock's purchase of 72 acres of prime greenfield land cost just £800,000. He's argued that this industrialised development is farm diversification. It is not. LP are now undertaking a retrospective sequential test, manipulating an agricultural site to fit in with their industrial process. Visit Lincoln describes Witham Valley Country Park as a collection of green parks and open spaces and highlights tourism as a focal point for future development. The site sits at the gateway to Lincolnshire, so visitors to the county would be welcomed by 2 factory buildings greater in size than Sainsbury's Lincoln. A 25-metre chimney will emit sulphur dioxide and ammonia in quantities and concentrations that Lincoln Proteins have been unable to quantify. This factory would operate 24/7 with up to 75 lorries making deliveries throughout the night. Lincoln Proteins maintain few improvements, if any, will be required to the A46, already an accident black spot, which has seen 3 fatal road traffic accidents. LP say they'll reduce the stench by implementing 2 thermal oxidizers, one of which was retrofitted at Pears Newark in 2016, shortly after which the following complaint was submitted. Yesterday, the smell was absolutely horrendous. I cannot believe that we have to deal with this as a way of life. I cannot continue this way. They have conceded that their lorries will smell, describing this as an insurmountable problem, and their vehicles as the weakest link. Their proposal to operate a just-in-time delivery system is sophistry, with lorries travelling long distances from all over the UK. When the A46 is closed, these HGVs will thunder through our local villages, carrying Category 1 specific risk material. The fallout from any accident would be catastrophic. We recognise the absolute integrity of the Central Lincolnshire Local Plan, the Evolving Minerals and Waste Local Plan, which you'll be speaking on today, and the Strategic Economic Plan. The core strategy and development management policy states the aim of spatial strategy is to promote new waste infrastructure away from greenfield sites. The countryside's intrinsic character and beauty should be recognised and protected. The pre-application proposals shared by Lincoln Proteins run counter to these documents on every conceivable level. Their aerial site plan has been carefully cropped so as to appear isolated. In reality, the nearest buildings are less than 300 metres away. Less than a mile away sit the multi-award-winning Hillholt Wood, Oak Hill Leisure, multiple leisure and tourism businesses, the BE Norton Disney Horse Trials, and the Lost Village Music Festival, attended by over 10,000 people. A residential school for autistic children is scheduled to open in spring 2018. Large planning consent has also been granted for Phase 3 of Witham St Hugh's, 1,200 properties with some affordable housing. It is clear that all of the above will be severely affected if this proposal is granted. The site also encompasses Norton Disney Roman Villa, a listed monument of national and historical significance, so development of this land is contrary to policy LP25 and the NPPF. The environmental impact is also a major concern. Last year, Lincoln Proteins was fined over £24,000 for grossly polluting local Lincolnshire waterways. They claim they will be creating jobs. Whilst this might be a persuasive argument, the majority of the employees will simply transfer from one site to another. And some of the jobs attributed are lorry drivers who reside outside of the county. They will take jobs away from established rural businesses which depend on the tranquility and beauty of the countryside. Finally, this is a situation of significant harm. The adverse impact would demonstrably outweigh any benefits of this proposal. Lincoln Proteins is asking Lincolnshire County Council to make a decision so irrational and perverse as to invite judicial scrutiny. We have instructed Richard Buxton, Environmental and Public Law, to advise us in this matter. Members of the Chamber, we sincerely thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Would you like to bring the petition down to me, please? The Chief Executive has determined that the petition requesting the Lincolnshire County Council take account of community concerns within the Witham Valley Park area regarding the proposal by Lincoln Proteins Limited to build an animal rendering plant at Norton Disney be referred to the Planning and Regulation Committee to be included for the committee's consideration in the Head of Planner report to be to the relevant meeting of the Planning and Regulation Committee if the development is submitted as a formal planning application. Thank you very much. You're more than welcome to go, or you can stay. It's entirely up to yourselves. Must have been, yeah. Right, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, Chairman's announcements. Firstly, I'd like to thank Lucille, my wife, for supporting me on these engagements, and also the Vice Chairman and Lady, Councillor Ron Oxby and Mrs Di Oxby, for representing us at civic functions which we've been unable to attend. Lincolnshire was delighted to welcome Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal when she visited Sents in Bourne, officially opening the Heckington Windmill regeneration project and the new premises at Linktran in Foldingworth. And I thank my Vice Chairman for acting on our behalf. On a sadder note, I have to report the death of Mr Tony Worth, CVO, who served as Her Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of Lincolnshire from 2008 to 2015. A memorial service is to be held in Lincoln Cathedral on Friday, the 12th of January at 11 o'clock. We'll move on to item number 6, statements and announcements by the Leader and members of the Executive. Statements by the Leader and members of the Executive are detailed as report reference number 6 in the agenda, which has been previously circulated. Members are asked to note the addition of Councillor Poll's statement as set out in the order of proceedings. Councillor Poll, would you like to say a few words? No? Well, that must be one of the shortest comments on record from yourself. Right, we'll move on to item number 7, questions to the Chairman, the Leader, Executive Councillors and Chairman of committees and subcommittees. I am anxious to allow a good spread of questions across the Chamber within the time allotted. I intend to allow 45 minutes for questions, and I am expecting councillors to be disciplined because of the time available. Would councillors wishing to ask questions please indicate by pressing their button to join the queue, and may I also remind councillors that once you have joined the queue, you do not need to press your button when I invite you to speak or when you sit down. Thank you. Firstly, we have Councillor Kelly for Nickworth.
Good morning, everybody. I would just like to know, in relation to heritage services, what in the current financial year is the difference between expected revenue and income, because obviously we all want our heritage services to be retained, but we need some sort of figure to be able to deal with that. So I just wondered if you would give me some figure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly, for the question. I think at this moment, before we come to the end of the financial year, we won't know the exact figures, but they will be obviously there as part of the budget. All I'll say at the moment, we are very much on target to meet our aspiration over the coming 2 years of breaking even and being at no cost to the taxpayer. We are doing very well, particularly at Lincoln Castle, where it's exceeding its expectations in terms of income. So I'm very pleased the way that is going. Not anticipating any changes to or changes to the Heritage Service or cuts to the Heritage Service. We are intending using the income that we receive to go back into Heritage Services to keep it going as it is at the moment, and hopefully making it even better. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We have Councillor Chris Brewis to Martin Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems only yesterday, but in fact it was a little while ago when I believe we were unanimous in this chamber, and I see a lot of us are wearing our badges, in supporting the campaign for fairer funding in Lincolnshire. And I think it's appropriate, probably, if you could, Martin, if you let us how you see this having proceeded so far, and give us an update on where we are. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, it was, I think it was the previous meeting or the previous one meeting where this council unanimously supported the fair funding campaign for Lincolnshire. Just to remind members, very important that we hold the government's feet to the fire in terms of their commitment to reform the local government, the mechanism they used for allocating resources to local councils. And you will have all seen the work where it's been worked out basically on one formula that we could actually end up £116 million a year better off than we are currently. So the campaign, so that is what is going on. The campaign has been very successfully supported by 6 out of the 7 MPs in Lincolnshire, and also by businesses, by parish councils, and by general public and various other partners, because frankly, why wouldn't you want to support a campaign to bring more money into our county, which then, of course, can be used for the benefit of our residents. So it is clear, and I've had a meeting with, along with some Lincolnshire MPs, with the Secretary of State, who was quite clear. First of all, he was very supportive of the work we do and acknowledged, despite our funding challenges, he recognised that we were probably challenged, weren't treated particularly fairly by the funding formula. But he did say, and I did quote, to say that actually, considering your financial situation, you have a well-run authority in Lincolnshire. And I think that's a very good thing for him to say. But he was also supportive of the campaign, as indeed the government is. We are, to remind members, not talking about 116 million or something else coming next year. Our formula is set for the next 2 years, because we signed the agreement with the government along with nearly all local authorities 2 years ago. So we know basically what we're going to get for the next 2 years. We are talking about 2020 and beyond. So there is support for that, and the government is about to launch a consultation document in terms of how the new formula could look, and we are quite clear, certainly from the County Council and the County Council's network, that the new formula should be more simple, should not be regressive, in other words, should not look back to what happened in the past, and should be activity-based, and basically what we do and fund for the activity and head of population. So quite a simple, clear proposition, and there could be, we are suggesting maybe a 10% tolerance at either end for issues such as the higher wages in London, shall we say. So we think that's a pretty simple situation, a simple proposition. We are talking to the Local Government Association, who we are under notice to leave at the end of the year unless they pull their socks up, basically. I'll put it as bluntly as that they should support this campaign and move forward. The problem with all of this, of course, is if County Council either wins absolutely or relatively, somebody else will lose out, and that somebody else will probably be London boroughs, who are funded ridiculously more than we are. So there will be a campaign against it. And the other problem we've got is the government doesn't, as we all are well too aware, doesn't enjoy a majority in the House of Commons. So they want to be confident when they put something through the House of Commons, which they need to do to change this formula, that actually it will actually go through. So I think it's important there is support across the piece, both across all sorts of individuals, but political as well, because if we can't get that political support across the whole spectrum, it will be that much more difficult, both at the LGA and in Parliament, to get this through. And as most of the country will gain, even places like Manchester and Birmingham, places like that, they would gain under this particular formula. So I think that is something we all need to work to. So the campaign is going very well. I would really like more support, unanimous support. We're not quite there yet, but we will continue the good work. And if anybody wants any badges, I've got plenty available, only 11p each, so if anybody wants to pick one up later, we're very happy to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Morgan for Councillor Colin Davey.
Thank you, Chairman. It has been well reported in the local media that we currently face a growing skills gap in Lincolnshire. This is partly owing to the vast number of young people who leave our county at aged 18 in order to study elsewhere, and they do not return until much later on in their life. I am amongst the minority of my peers who have chosen to stay in Lincolnshire to start my career and training. Therefore, I am interested to know from the Executive Councillor for Economy and Place what his department are doing to promote the fantastic opportunities that Lincolnshire has to offer its young people.
Thank you, Councillor Morn, for the question and the advance notice, so I could come up with a really fulsome reply for you. The stark reality of the skills challenge is this. By 2024, economic forecasting indicates we'll have 207,000 job vacancies in our county. There's only 127,000 young people coming into the world of work in that period, and as we know, many of those do choose to leave our county. So that is the stark reality of the challenge. Obviously, encouraging our young people to stay in the county is an absolute priority for both myself and Councillor Bradwell and the local enterprise partnership. Young people are, of course, the future of our county and the future of our economy. We must recognise, however, that young people will always want to move around the country, they want to go to university and they want to try out new things. And Lincolnshire is no different to any other part of the country in that regard. But I'm very clear that people like Councillor Morn, who's one of our young people who's made a decision to see a positive career in this county, and we need to encourage those opportunities and we need to encourage those people to contribute to the growing economy that this county offers. I'm going to mention a few examples of the activities that we're doing to provide these opportunities. The council's actual budget for skills is very small, but by very positively attracting large grants, we've been able to extend the provision that we offer so it is available across the whole county. Firstly, it is very important we provide information to young people and to the people who shape their decisions, parents, carers, schools, colleges and training providers. We do this through packs of information as well as via social media campaigns, and in particular the new World of Work website, which I draw all your attention to, which highlights many of the wonderful careers that are on offer within the county. Secondly, promoted through libraries, schools, children's centres and the To Aspire website, the Adult Learning Service offers a vast range of inspiring learning opportunities across Lincolnshire to help increase skills. And thirdly, Lincolnshire is at the forefront of two new forward-thinking skills initiatives, which were announced earlier this month as part of the government's autumn budget statement. These are the Career Learning Pilot and the Skills Advisory Panel. These two exciting projects, to be promoted through the LEP, will help shape the future of the skills for adult learning and ensure local training provision meets the need of Lincolnshire's employers. And finally, the Council is planning a careers fair in the spring, targeted at Lincolnshire schools, to promote careers in local government to help retain our valuable young people. I hope this answer is of reassurance to you. Councillor Morgan is absolutely right. It is such an important subject and one that requires tackling across different levels and different departments of local government. And I would urge all members in this chamber to help make these positive messages available to as many young people as they can and promote the World of Work website. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. We have Councillor Kev Clark to Councillor Richard Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Davis, for 8.5 years now, residents in my division have been requesting yellow lines outside the properties. The County Council response has been that no new lines will be laid apart from new developments. However, the authority have been quoted in the local press as saying that any request will be looked at. Could the executive member please inform me today what is the current position with yellow lines, and is it a stance that's carried out throughout the county or just in Lincoln? Thank you.
Thank you. May I say as well how nice it is to see your colleague up and about. With regards to the TRO process, traffic regulation orders which dictate where we put yellow lines, there has been a moratorium while some of the budget revaluation work was done. However, we are in a position to start looking at applications again. I'm due to send out an email next week on this. Funds are limited. We're using some surplus coming from the civilian parking enforcement to do so. We are prioritising schools, road safety issues, and those potentially those schemes that have been on the books the longest. So if you want to get in touch, I'll pop down and we can have a look.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Marianne Overton to Councillor Richard Davis.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We've had a petition today about potholes, and I want to start by thanking the Council for the work on potholes, which I have found very responsive when they're deep. Deep potholes we do seem to be able to get filled, so thank you for that new system. Secondly, the issue about slightly longer term problems, and the line's been mentioned, but we've got a footpath in our area which you very kindly wrote and asked what we had, and I put that forward. Is there a limit to the funding for potholes? Are we going to run out before the end of the year? And is there, what kind of level of funding compared to need have you got available for the slightly bigger projects that we all need in our areas? I recognise that the real problem is not enough money coming into the council in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm pleased you've taken the opportunity to contact me about the footpath after I emailed out, and thank you to other members who've done the same. I think we talk a lot, don't we, in the council chamber about potholes or major infrastructure schemes. We're very good at talking about individual potholes, but also Lincoln Bypass, Grantham Southern Relief Road, issues in Boston, Spalding and on the East Coast. And members will be aware there was a briefing this morning about the Coastal Highway project. The reason for contacting members about these potentially smaller schemes is exactly the issue you talk about in your patch, in terms of smaller schemes that can make a real difference to people's lives. I know that you're not asking for a bypass or a four-lane motorway through the middle of Leadenham or Navenby. What you're saying is, for a relatively small amount of money, can we make the footpath bigger, which will impact, especially where the school is, on a lot of people. In terms of our capital expenditure, it runs in excess of about £50 million a year. Could we spend more? Yes. Will we run out? Theoretically, we could always spend more money, and we'd like more. Specifically on pothole funds, I think we spend directly about £5 million a year on reactive potholing. But one of the things that you alluded to right at the beginning of your question was the application of what we call asset management approach. Really controversial. I know a lot of members here take great delight in kicking me over it at times, because it does deliver sometimes what seems to be slightly perverse decisions, in as much as we spend money repairing roads before they fail in advance of roads that have failed. This approach meant that 2 years ago we were named as one of the 2 top highways authorities in the country, but it does mean that sometimes impacts on the highway look a bit unusual. But I think now we've had that full cycle, and we are starting to see those improvements, because roads aren't getting worse that under the old style of reactive maintenance would have done. However, I know you work very closely with the LGA, and if there is any money sloshing around there that they're looking to spend, I'd like to say on behalf of Lincolnshire County Council, we'll very happily spend it on potholes for you.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Sarah Dodds for Councillor Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Woolley, the Lincolnshire Refugee Doctor Project can show that they can recruit and train refugee doctors for a very small part that the NHS spends on locum doctors now. Would you commit to please meet with the organisers of this scheme to see how the Council can best support this worthwhile project, which presents a potential real and tangible win-win for both refugees, medics and for the population in Lincolnshire? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your question, Councillor Dodds. Absolutely, joined up with you all the way on that. And in fact, I can also tell you that I understand that one of our previous officers of the County Council is now in place driving exactly that sort of thing forward. It has to be a good thing for Lincolnshire. It also has to be a damn good thing for the refugees as well. And I completely support you.
Thank you, Councillor Woolley. Councillor Paul Key for Councillor Richard Davies.
Thank you, Chair. So it might be a little bit long-winded, but it's about an article in the county news. So if I don't give you this bit, the other bit won't make any sense. But it says streetlights, no surprise there. Last year, the council introduced a new approach to street lighting to cut 1.7 million from the 5 million cost. As a result of the changes, around 42,000 streetlights are switched off between midnight and 6 a.m. A panel of councillors is now carrying out a formal review of the impact of the park night lighting, looking at topics including crime rates, safety fears and road accidents. As part of the process, people are being asked to complete a short questionnaire to share their views. All feedback received will be taken into consideration while the panel decides its recommendation to the council decision makers. But the bit after that says, however, while this may include amendments to the policy, the available budget would not allow for wholesale reversal of these changes. So my question is, who instructed this article to be put out to the public of Lincolnshire with a statement like that in? Thank you.
I will take this as you mentioned the street lighting word. To answer your specific question, that would be a matter for the comms team and perhaps the leader may want to elaborate. I think the point that's trying to be made is that we have a one-year budget currently, and in the terms of this current budget that the council set, we don't have the funds to turn all the street lights back on. I don't think that's prejudging a decision that may happen in the future. However, I think it's right that we don't kid our population that this is a decision whether or not we have, in isolation, whether we have streetlights on. Now, I'm not going to certainly intercede on Councillor Newton's review, and it's not for me as the executive member to prejudge it, but I think very rightly what the scrutiny panel is doing is saying decisions that are made have to be made on evidence, but also on the whole. You can't look in issues in isolation, so if there are cost implications, the panel has to consider that, because actually, not unlike the previous question from Councillor Overton, in an ideal world, we would probably spend a great deal more money doing a great deal more things. So any kind of review that looks at street lighting, it's imperative that the costs aren't excluded from that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Eddie Strangle to Councillor Martin Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. My question to the leader, in fact, was preempted slightly by Councillor Brewis, but he makes a very good point. Has the leader still got unanimous support within this council? And indeed, although it's very sad to hear that the Member of Parliament for Lincoln is not supporting him and us in Lincolnshire, does that also apply to Lincoln City Council as the Labour controlling group? Have they indicated whether they will support the fair funding review as well? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to thank all members who have supported unanimously our campaign, and particularly members of other parties, because I think I would congratulate them in putting party politics above the interests of the residents. As I said in my earlier speech, it is very welcoming that there's been so much support for this campaign, and I've had lots of letters from clerks of parish councils, for example, and we are about to launch a more public campaign. It is unfortunate, though, that you are correct that one of our MPs has declined to support the campaign, and indeed I got a letter from the leader of Lincoln City Council, the council which I believe you sit on, telling me that his council, the council he led, was not prepared to support it because, in their view, under one of the formulas that's been looked at, the City Council, although the area would receive £116 million more a year, under this particular formula, the City Council could potentially lose nearly £1 million. I think that's a bit short-sighted, frankly, because I think my view is we're all here elected not to represent the County Council to the public or the City Council to the public. We are here to represent the public to the councils on which we sit. So although if it did turn out to be the case that Lincoln City Council lost money, and depending on how the formulas work, that's not necessarily a given, so there wasn't even conditional support, the residents of Lincoln City would actually gain because of this £116 million potentially coming to the county. It's inevitable that probably on average 1/7 of that, or probably even more than that, would come to the residents of the City Council. So are we here to represent the council? Are we here to represent the public that elect us? And I think I'm quite clear on the answer of that. The Member of Parliament does mystify me slightly because, of course, she doesn't just represent the City Council area, she represents villages outside Lincoln, and of course they would all, under any formula, would gain substantially. So I have written to them to ask them to reconsider their decision in the light of, to support their residents, but unfortunately, as yet, I've had no reply. And I don't really want to turn this into an argument, and I'd much prefer it if others would actually support the campaign, even if it was conditional on the fact that, as long as they didn't lose out, we could do that. But I think it's very important we all work together to get that extra money so that the residents of Lincoln City, in this case, can actually gain more money and more resources, because obviously we would then, whoever controlled that whoever was given that £116 million would inevitably give it to the residents which we all support.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Alison Austin to Councillor Colin Davey.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, Colin, work on the Boston Barrier will commence in the new year. This council has £11 million ring-fenced to be used in conjunction with the scheme. A report to the executive on the project in 2015, this executive of this council on the project in 2015, stated that the £11 million should be used, and I quote, to deliver best value for Boston and improved economic outcomes for the town. In view of a number of changed circumstances since that date, can the people of Boston be assured that thought is now given as to how the recommendations of that report are modified to meet these stated aims? That's the end of my question, but as you know, the official timing of that announcement regarding the barrier was made on the 4th anniversary of the 2013 floods, and of course came as a very welcome Christmas present to the people of Boston. So may we therefore wish you a happy Christmas.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. That's very kind. I think, firstly, I think we should reflect on the fact that this council's commitment to put that £11 million, and obviously the portfolio holder for finance, my colleague Councillor Hill's decision to commit that money was a catalyst for this project moving forward. And in the same way, we've committed funding to Louth and Horncastle flood alleviation schemes. Those schemes have been completed. They would not have got over the line without our support and our commitment. So I think we should all applaud the fact that this council is out there doing positive things for people across the county around floodwater management. Absolutely welcome news, and we should all celebrate the fact that this decision means that there is an economic future for Boston that can be planned. Risk is reduced for businesses to invest in Boston. The position you've outlined is absolutely correct, that the 3rd of February meeting of the Executive in 2015 agreed that the allocation should be committed to realising improved economic outcomes for Boston. That position has not changed. That money will be used carefully and thoughtfully in terms of how we develop schemes for Boston. There will be a proper process around that, which will be the executive councillors, and then through the committee you sit on, which will scrutinise any plans we have for investing in Boston and the communities. I'm very clear. This money should be used to deliver best value. It should be used on schemes that deliver real outcomes for the people of the area, but also deliver real potential economic benefits long term, so that Boston can really start performing above the current position it's in. I am excited about the future for Boston. I think there's a lot going on. We've got some world-class businesses in Boston. I've been looking at one or two of them recently. Jakeman's, as you know, is a world-class business. Rolec, who are leading nationally on electric charging points, 160 fantastic engineers working there. You know, we should celebrate the fact that Boston's got a lot going for it. This project, now green-lighted, helps give certainty to Boston's economic future, and we will work with the leader and across our council to deliver some economic outcomes that really benefit the people of Boston.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Rob Parker for Councillor Martin Hill.
Next week, the executive meet to discuss the budget for 2018-19. If we fast forward a year to December 2018, we'll be discussing the budget for 2019-20. And essentially, the start date of the budget year, April 2019, is the first year when we will be no longer a member of the European Union. That means we will have, as a nation, the United Kingdom will have at least £350 million a week to be able to spend, because I saw that on the side of a bus, and Boris Johnson told me about it as well. So in a sense, we will have, as a nation, £350 million a week times 52, which is a lot of money. How much do you think we'll get in local government, and how much do you think the case can be made for local government to get a fair share of that money, and how much do you think will come into Lincolnshire? And how do you think the budget that we're setting this year, well, in next week, will have be impacted by the amount of money that we will have, this great big surplus income, as a result of the decision to leave the EU?
Well, thank you for the question. Of course, I didn't paint £350 million on the side of the bus, and actually I didn't write to all the households in the country telling them that Armageddon would arrive if we voted for Brexit. I think we've got to respect. I mean, I voted personally for Brexit, but wherever you are, I think it should be respected, and I think there is impatience across the country, not just from those who voted Brexit, from many other people who just want the decision of the public to be enacted. There are some people on both extremes who probably have extreme views, but I think the broad mass of the people and politicians actually is let's just get on with it. I think it is important, and there are some ramifications of when we finally leave the EU. We don't know, of course, yet under what terms they will be, which is why there is a lot of work going on, both through the LGA, who are doing a lot of work. The Deputy Leader of Suffolk is actually heading a committee at the LGA, which is actually looking at all the issues which will affect local government and making sure that is inputted into the negotiations with the European Union. And of course, in this very council, we have our own Brexit. There is a Brexit working group looking at what that might be and how much money, the impact on migration, the impact on agricultural subsidies, and the impact on support to businesses through economic development. I think the acknowledged figure, and there is some people who say the £350 million a week was too low actually, but I think the consensus is we are talking about something between 10 and 15 billion pounds a year, which will no longer go to the European Union. And I think it's important when the two things should happen. One, there should be a consistent way that money is spent, but also I think local government is also saying, please can we just give it straight to local government in this country, as it's going to probably do with Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, so that we can have that money and we can locally decide how that money is spent. But yes, there's a lot up in the air, and obviously we wait to see what the final result is, but there will, whatever happens, be more money coming back in control, we control that money, because I'll remind you it said that the word is control, and and we could argue all day about the semantics of what we're talking about, but I think you have a valid point that it's very important that for the country and for councils that we get the best deal possible, but also within that as much money is repatriated as locally as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Dan McAnally to Councillor Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Woolley, I understand you attended the health scrutiny meeting on Wednesday this week. Do you accept the reassurances given by the Thames Ambulance Service that they will be able to provide a non-emergency service our residents can have a confidence in?
Thank you. It comes on. Thank you, Councillor McNally. I'm going to try and get through this response without swearing. And it's going to be incredibly difficult. I don't think I have ever known an organisation, I can't even say provide a service because I think they're failing miserably to do that. Not only have they come into our county at quite a late stage, they've practically decimated the voluntary car drivers scheme. There are over 70 people less now offering their services in this county. We rely on volunteers for all sorts of things, particularly the car driver scheme, because predominantly it's for frail, elderly people who aren't able to drive themselves. Quite frankly, they are a very poor provider, and they don't deserve the contract, and I'm just now starting to pick myself off the ceiling, but I think you can be assured that we are following through with making chivying up the CCG, the Lincolnshire West CCG, to ensure, as commissioners of the service, to make sure that they adhere to their key performance indicators, all of which on Wednesday they had failed to date since they took the contract over. It really is absolutely appalling and very, very disappointing that at the moment there is the possibility that they have a contract for 5 years. I don't think they'll get it within 5 months of it at this rate.
Thank you, Councillor Woolley. We have no more councillors indicating that they want to ask any questions, so we'll move on to item 8, the appointment of Vice Chairman and Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. Councillor Hill to move.
Pretty straightforward, Chairman. I'm proposing that this council has to make the appointments to Chairman and Vice Chairman of committees, so I'm proposing that Councillor Ray Wharton be appointed as Vice Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and for information purposes, that Councillor Lindsay Corey is then becomes support councillor to Councillor Nick Worth with culture and fire brigade and all the other stuff that he has to deal with. So it's pretty straightforward recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bradwell. We'll go to the vote. Those in favour? Do beg pardon.
That's impressed. Thank you very much indeed. I don't see a particular problem with this, other than I'd just like to make the point about scrutiny. It is scrutinising the executive, and to some extent that means really that we should have a system where it wasn't, I would quite like it if it wasn't the actual chairman of the executive proposing who should be chief scrutineer of himself. I think it just would look a little bit better from the public perception if we could have scrutiny calling for scrutiny chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Councillor Rob Parker.
Of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, I just wanted to say two things. First of all, to thank Councillor Lindsay Corey for the work that she did as Vice Chair during the periods that she was in office, and I thank you for that, Lindsay. And I look forward to working with Ray Wotton as Vice Chair in the coming months.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. We'll go to the vote now. Those in favour? Any against? None against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 9, the Lincolnshire Minerals and Waste Local Plan Site Locations. Report by the Executive Director of Environment and Economy has been circulated, and Councillor Eric Baltimore. Eddie Bolt, do apologise.
Sorry, Chairman, I thought somebody had borrowed my beard and moved in. Yeah, it gives me great pleasure to move that the Lincolnshire Waste and Minerals Local Plan Site Location document attached to Appendix C to the report be adopted by the Council, Chairman.
Thank you, Eddie. Councillor Pole. Councillor Marianne Overton.
Document. I think it's important that we have clearly laid out where we're going with our waste management strategy, and I'd also like to thank officers for the detailed work that is clearly behind this. It is a substantial piece of work, and I know the committee has also worked very hard on it to get so much detail, so carefully collated, and so clearly presented. The issue I would just like to raise is the forecast of gaps in capacity on page 109. I recognise that what we're looking for is that we're producing this amount of waste, and where is it going? One of the complications is that, as we heard earlier, some of the waste is very national in its production and its treatment. There are only, I understand, 6 specialist sites, for example, for rendering, so for the whole country. So I'm thinking that whilst we have these, I think it's important to recognise that these are calculations, but they could be fulfilled external to Lincolnshire or internal to Lincolnshire. You can't tell from the document, I think. So I may be wrong with that, and somebody might like to clarify, but the important point is that we're no longer in a very closed system. Now it is very much the world of waste is a national one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Before I go to the next councillors that have got questions, I should have asked for a seconder for this motion. Do I have a seconder?
I'm very pleased to second, Chairman. Very pleased.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Julie Kelly.
Yeah. In relation to the core strategy of outputs of sand and gravel, and I do realise that there's no shortfall, I just would like some more of an explanation why the Wisby site has not had more consideration, because obviously it's going to cease production in the next few years.
Councillor Alison Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not asking a question. I'm just going to give my support to this policy because I've seen it in various forms in scrutiny over the last 4 years, and I feel that it has been well scrutinised and is well thought out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go to the vote now. All... Oh, right. Councillor Pole, would you like to come back? Eric.
I kind of got a feeling Eric's going to stick, you know. Yeah, thank you all for your comments and your support. And I would say, Councillor Kelly, as Councillor Austin said, it's been 4 years in the scrutiny. I mean, the time to ask that question probably was then, but I'll make sure you get the information you asked for. Thank you. Other than that, Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pole. Right, we'll go to the vote now. All those in favour? Do we have any against? Any abstentions? Right, that's carried unanimously. Move on to item number 10, the appointment of Lincolnshire County Council's independent remuneration panel. Report of the Executive Director responsible for democratic services has been circulated. I invite Councillor Mrs Jackie Brockway to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Chairman. You can see this in your paper. The independent panel serves a very important function, but because of 2 resignations, we really need to get the numbers back up to 5 from the 3 where they are at the moment. You can see the 2 names in the recommendation box, so I just move the paper, Chairman.
Do we have a seconder for this motion?
If I may, thank you, Chairman. Happy to second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brewis. Right, see nobody indicating, so we'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 11, amendments to the Constitution. A report by the Monitoring Officer has been circulated, and I'll ask Councillor Mrs Brockway to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Again, the amendments to the Constitution are there for you to see. And just by way of information and interest for the Council, actually, when these amendments are done, a great deal of work goes into them, particularly in this case with the petitions amendments. You've seen the petitions, the excellent presentations that we had this morning, but it is not always appropriate to come to Council, but at the same time, we have to maintain a complete fairness of access. And unusually, I would like to pay particular tribute to officers Kate Sobstill, Rachel Wilson and Nigel West for the huge amount of work that went into these amendments. I move the paper, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder for the motion?
Chairman, I'm more than happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Strange. We'll move to the vote. Can I have all those in favour? Any against? No, none against. Any abstentions? 1 abstention. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 12, motions of notice submitted in accordance with the Council's Constitution. And members are reminded of the rules of debate, and those are set out below. First motion is by Councillor Mrs Sue Woolley, and Councillor Woolley to move.
Colleagues, I think and hope this is probably going to be the easiest motion in the world to support. This is quite a long-running campaign now by the Royal British Legion to try and persuade government that through the ONS that there are questions put on the next census in 2021 to include pieces of information that can be gleaned around members of the armed forces. Apparently, after the last census in 2011, we knew more about the Jedi population than we did about the armed forces, despite there being 1 in 10 of us having served in one form or another. It's ridiculous. In October of this year, the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, did agree to put forward to government that there should be a recommendation that questions are put on the census, but that doesn't mean to say that they're over the line, and it would be very helpful from my point of view, and indeed everyone who lives in Lincolnshire who does serve in the forces, if Lincolnshire County Council could be seen to support this motion. I will leave it at that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Woolley. Do we have a seconder for this motion?
Chairman, yeah, I'm delighted to be able to second this motion. the armed forces have our deepest respect for putting their lives on the line over decades and continue to do so. And the more information we have that we can help them through their lives as they come out of the armed forces, the better, and fulfil our role under the Armed Services Covenant. So delighted to second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Worth. Councillor Chris Brewis.
Just briefly to say, having yesterday had the extremely good fortune to go around Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and by pure luck being shown round on my own, because I was the only one for that visit, I learnt so much. But as some of you know, my dad was a decorated war hero, and my mum's eldest brother, who was born towards the end of the 19th century, was killed at Gallipoli. And the reason we are here today partly is because what they did for us, or we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing today here, would we? Unless we forget. To me, it's even more important as the number of people who were alive during the Second World War gets smaller and smaller, that we take every opportunity to remind people of this particular issue, and this would help a bit. And I, for one, wholeheartedly support this idea.
Thank you, Councillor Brewis. Councillor Sarah Dobbs.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll be delighted to support this motion. It was only a few council meetings back that I was passing a similar motion at East Lindsey District Council, and I would hope that this is now replicated throughout all of the district councils as well as in this chamber, and that those of us who haven't passed similar motions at district level will proceed to do so, so that we really do have a united Lincolnshire voice on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dobbs. Councillor Barry Young.
Supporting the British Legion in their campaign has my wholehearted support. There's just one minor point, but it's a very important one. Councillor Woolley talked about the Office for National Statistics saying that it will recommend that questions be asked. That's what the British Legion has been asking for some time. But if you look at one of the latest posts on Google in the name of the British Legion, it reports that the Office for National Statistics has confirmed their intention to recommend the inclusion of a question. Now, it's either going to have to be a very long question, or what is really wanted is a section. And if you could put that in the recommendation, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Matthew Fido.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it is especially poignant that we are making this motion within the county of Lincolnshire, a county with such great military history, the home of the tank, the home of the dam busters, the 617 Squadron, and especially in modern times as well, the home of the UAVs, which are doing so much within the Middle East to counter ISIS. And I want to especially pay tribute to all the brave men and women, both past and present, within our armed forces that are serving actively today or have served previously. And I, for one, am absolutely proud to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fido. Right, we'll go straight to the vote. All those... Oh. Councillor Eddie Strangle.
Thank you, Chairman. I know I'm small, but I'm still here. And I'm not called Eric. Somebody else will be. Thank you, Chairman. As an ex-serviceman myself, I fully support it. But I wanted to talk basically because the aftermath of both the Falklands, the Iraq wars, and indeed Afghanistan has come home to roost in Lincoln and Lincolnshire itself. And I know Matthew spoke about the RAF, but I'm an ex-army man. And of course, all services fought and served this country well in these conflicts and others. From a perspective of being a trustee of the Nomad Trust, I have seen at first hand the impact on post-traumatic stress disorder that these people are coming back with. Young men and women that are coming back with really serious tales to tell. And it's very sad that we see some of these, in fact, on our streets, which of course the Nomad Trust and other organisations look after. But it is important that we remember that we have to support those not only serving in this wonderful country, or serving the country and the Queen, that we actually support them when they come out as well. And the Royal British Legion does a fantastic job in that, along with SAFA and other organisations. And I think it's only right that we as a council, and I take the point that Councillor Dodds made, that other councils in fact should be invited to support this as much as we do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Tramville. Right, we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? None against. Any abstentions? Then that motion is carried. Before we move on to the next item on the agenda, I'd like to understand that Councillor Christine Talbot would like to say something.
How unusual for me after this length of time, but I have to apologise to the council. It didn't occur to me till we were well down the order of proceedings today that I should have declared that Richard Quirk, who's newly appointed to the Remuneration panel, has been a personal family friend for the last 27 years, and I think I should have declared it at the beginning, so I apologise.
Thank you, Councillor Talbot. All right, we'll move on to the second motion from Councillor Rob Parker, and ask Councillor Parker to move.
I hope to get the same sort of response and support that the last motion got, but somehow I feel that though that may be a little harder. I think everybody knows something about this report, which is State of the Nation 2017, Social Mobility in Great Britain, which is an annual report about the state of the nation. It looks in particular at three key areas. Looks at education, employability and housing prospects. It ranks every district area, and I want to stress that we are not talking about district councils' activities, we're just talking about a geographical district area, all 324, and lists them according to performance relative to each other. So what we're looking at essentially is the question of how well do we do comparatively in our 7 districts in Lincolnshire to the rest of the country. We may accept that there's not enough money going into local government in general. We may accept that Lincolnshire gets an unfair distribution, and certainly the Fairer Funding campaign is about that. But I think that we need to recognise that there are differences not just between Lincolnshire districts nationally, but big differences within Lincolnshire. And that is of something that we may feel as though we want to handle. If we take, first of all, early years, we can recognise that overall, all the 7 district areas do well in the scoring. All are in the top half of councils in England, and 3 of our council areas are in the top 10 of all councils. Yet within East Lindsey, children performed less well by comparison. And what that means, in a sense, is for us to understand that the figures for children eligible for free school meals who achieve a good level of development in early years foundation are different. And the simple best example is that 12 children per 100 fewer in East Lindsey achieve a good level of development than in South Holland. So we ask the question, why? And that's part of the conclusion that we come to, is that we as a council need to do something about it. If we look at schools and we look at the percentage, and I know these are about statistics, percentage of children eligible for free school meals who attend a primary school rated as outstanding or good, we can see again, and Lincolnshire does well, very well nationally, yet one exception, South Holland, is ranked 267th out of 324 areas. Why is that? The point that I want to make, particularly in relation to children, is this argument about every child matters. And when we talk about statistics and percentages, it hides the fact that we're talking about a difference of between 49 and 61 is 12. That's 12 children per 100 are not getting in one area the same level of schooling as rated by Ofsted as in another. When we look at children eligible for free school meals going to secondary school, the position is less satisfactory in Lincolnshire. We talk about secondary schools who are rated good or outstanding by Ofsted, with none of the 7 district areas being ranked in the top third in the United Kingdom. But what's noticeable particularly is that we've got North Kesteven and South Kesteven in 120th place ranking in the country out of 324, yet South Holland and West Lindsey schools, where children attend, secondary schools attend a good or outstanding secondary school, are 130 places lower. We need to remember, as I said, that every child matters, and these are not just simple statistics. When it comes to young people leaving education and going into further education or university, we see again that we have, in relation to disadvantaged children, children on free school meals, we can see that we've got a very good reputation, ranking system for Boston and West Lindsey. Why is it not as good in Lincoln? Across the whole of Lincolnshire, when it comes to percentage of young people eligible for free school meals at 15, going into higher education at 19, the figures are even worse. And even worse are the number of children that go to what might be considered a good university, children who are on free school meals. Why is that? And why is it so bad in Lincolnshire? And why are there differences? If we look at housing, and again, this is outside of our control, but in a sense, I'm thinking about issues relating to how well we can translate good education into decent earnings, which then look at housing and people owning their own houses. If we look at the percentage of families with children who own their own houses, there's a wide disparity in our county between North Kesteven area and West Lindsey, which those two are placed much, much higher than the other 5 districts when it comes to families with children owning their own homes. Looking at the weekly salaries of people living in local areas, we know that Lincolnshire is a low-wage economy. The highest place in our national table is South Holland, but adjacent Boston is very close to the bottom of the national table when it comes to the weekly levels of salary. So, one of the things that I want to do by way of conclusion is to recognise that we can't do this on our own. We have to work with partners like district councils, schools, Lincolnshire LEP. This resolution is meant to be a first step towards improving the life chances of the most disadvantaged people, and particularly children and young people. We can't allow so much undeveloped and unrealised potential to go to waste. And as Colin Davies said a moment ago, young people are the future of our county. We look for your support in passing this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Dodds, thank you very much. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a real pleasure to be able to support this motion and to second it. The State of the Nation Social Mobility Report starts off with a really stark sentence. Britain is a deeply divided nation. Here in Leaf Rural Lincolnshire, we could say that we are a divided county, and we only have to listen and take on board Councillor Parker's statistics to realise that. One sentence in the report really hit home to me. Some affluent areas are amongst the worst for offering good education and employment opportunities to the most disadvantaged residents. How can we not think of Lincolnshire in that context on the grounds of what Councillor Parker has just told us? In 2015 to 16, our attainment gap between free school meals and non-free school meals children at GCSE stood at 31% for GCSEs. In East Lindsey, that gap stood at 36%, whereas nationally it was 28%. In London, however, over half of children on free school meals achieved A-star in English and maths. There is a clear disparity. The report highlights there is a mind-blowing inconsistency of practice. It is the breeding ground for the local lottery and life chances that exists today. All too often, schemes start and then wither away. Initiatives lack scale. Experience is not pooled. Most worryingly of all, evidence about what works to improve social mobility is at best not properly embedded At worst, it is ignored. When that happens, precious public resources are wasted and the potential for social progress is lost. So having looked at that big collective picture, I want us to ask us all sincerely a question, both officers and councillors in this room. What are we here for? Most importantly, who are we here for? What is our role? What is our very reason for being? What is the point of us being here if it is not to tackle the burning injustices of our day? We may all claim to support the meritocracy idea, but are we individually and collectively willing to walk the walk, or are we all talk? I do hope that we can all support this motion. It is trying to provide this council with a clear opportunity, first of all, to scope the scale of the problem that we face, and then actually put our collective shoulders to the wheel to do something about it. Doing this is what local government should be about. It's about our children, it's about our young people and our future. I want to close by quoting a section of the report. Tinkering with change will not do the trick. Whole tracts of our community feel left behind because they are. Whole communities feel the benefits of globalisation have passed them by because they have. Whole sections of society feel they are not getting a fair chance to succeed because they are not. That sense of being left behind, of being alienated, would not be good enough for my children. And if it's not
Councillor Dodds.
for my children, why would I think it would be good enough for anybody else's?
Councillor Richard Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a big supporter of social mobility. Having gone to a grammar school myself and being born a stone's throw away from where a shopkeeper's daughter socially mobiled herself up to being Prime Minister, it's not surprising that I would endorse any attempts we have as a society to make the world a better place. In fact, I now live where a gentleman, a boy was born who went from private to Field Marshal. Again, a fantastic example of social mobility. My problem is that other than the fact that the Social Mobility Commission admits by its own auspices that it has done nothing to achieve anything, and in fact the only correlation you can see nationally is that since it was established, social mobility has gone down, the reality is this is not a place for big government. Because while Councillor Parker admirably spells out some issues that we could all agree with, problems in education, in the workplace auspices for people, and Councillor Davies already talked at some length about what his ambition is and what's already been done to develop these. Reality, what we're talking about here is tax and spend. We're talking about big government intervention telling you not only how to raise your children, but how to run your businesses. What we promote is the living wage. By any measure, even the London School of Economics, that bastion of right-wing intellectual thinking admits that price controls reduce availability. Price controls reduce freedom. Price controls reduce cost. Sorry, increase cost. And most purportedly at all in Washington, D.C., we've seen this only 2 years ago, where the minimum wage was introduced from $9 an hour to $15 an hour. What have we seen? 30,000 jobs lost. But more discreet than that and more concerning than that is the fact that when you put up the cost of employing people, you stop businesses employing people. And why is it that the last Labour government left us with a shocking display of disparity? By the hardest hit sections of our society in terms of unemployment rates are the very poorest and the less skilled. Because those people in Islington in their ivory towers do not understand what it's like to run a business. They do not understand the decisions that people have to make. And do not be fooled. They certainly don't understand what it's like to raise a family up here in Lincolnshire. So I would ask you to support our Executive Member for Education, our Executive Member for Economic Development in their ambition for the county, but don't be fooled that tax and spend is the answer. Because when it comes to national government programmes, be it HS2 or be it the NHS IT system, we inevitably know where they end up.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's hard to follow about national government, but perhaps it is opportune to welcome the announcement yesterday that the government is to establish a future talent fund to support the talent of young people and avoid them being wasted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kev Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. As my colleague said, the opening lines of the report are Britain are a deeply divided nation. Well, we all knew that to start off with. However, the split isn't in this report north-south. It clearly points that London is the best supported area. The report doesn't paint a good image for the rest of the country. However, the report must be a wake-up for one, the government, and two, authorities such as ours. Whilst the authority are striving for fairer funding for the county and its residents, the report shows clearly the funding formula used is totally is biased. The State of the Nation document affects all of Lincolnshire. The county should take note of the report and work with district councils, no matter what colour they are, to improve standards of people in Lincolnshire. No one suggests that overnight the council will adopt all the recommendations. However, we should make a start and we should introduce a living wage. And as an employer and a leading authority, we should set that example for others to follow. Thank you. And happy Christmas.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Colin Matthews.
Thank you. Yesterday, it's not a guess the song, at the Reform Group inaugural conference on social mobility, Justin Greening, the Secretary of State for Education, launched the report Unlocking Talent, Fulfilling Potential. It was shaped by a report that came out in October that we're referring to today. The report has 4 ambitions, or promotes 4 government ambitions. Close the gap in the early years. Close the attainment gap in school while continuing to raise standards for all. Ambition 3, Councillor David referred to this earlier, high quality post-16 education choices for all young people. And ambition 4, everyone achieves their full potential in rewarding careers. The report commits a considerable amount of money to improvements. It talks about lots of millions of pounds against different threads. It's focusing on what works, important issues that were raised by my colleagues here, and it's focused on evidence-led approaches. It promotes partnership working and funds sector-led improvement. Lincolnshire County Council is recognised as a national leader, an outstanding practitioner. We haven't had time to read and consider the full report. I recognise the value and importance of the 5 issues raised, but I believe with significant national policy covering these 5 areas and introducing funding streams and introducing time implications for Lincolnshire County Council, with that report released yesterday, today is not the day to make decisions that may clash with that national policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Councillor Patricia Bradwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I've listened to what Councillor Parker and Dodds have said, and actually I have read the report, and actually we discussed it as lead members at, in the East Midlands only 10 days ago. I do believe that in Lincolnshire, though, although we've mentioned some of our schools, the children in them are not attaining as they should do. I mean, we have actually put in bids to the government, and we've recently been successful in some money to help promote and help schools that children haven't achieved in maths, and we've put another bid in to help with reading and writing. I think we have to understand that with so many academies in our county now, it's about working with schools. We can't just go in like we used to do when we had school improvement and say, well, this is what you're going to do. We have to work with schools. And I have to say, the academies do work very well with Debbie and her team. They want to help and get their children to achieve. as we've said, it's not that easy, but we have got additional funding coming into the county because we do recognise from early years through to secondary, we have got some gaps in some of parts of our county. I do believe, though, that we have more good or outstanding schools than many counties in the country, and actually we have, I will admit, we have pockets where we need to do more, and that's what we're doing. There is nothing more important, I don't think, to me or my colleagues on this side of the chamber in getting and knowing that our young people do achieve their full potential, and that's what we're here trying to do. But as has been mentioned by Councillor Dodds, the London boroughs are actually leaving Lincolnshire children now, and many councils within the East Midlands. And that is down to funding. It is purely down to funding. They get double the amount of funding for their schools than we do in Lincolnshire, and that has to help. If you can have more teaching assistants in schools and that has to help the children who need that attention. So I would actually say to everybody that we all do need to get on board with the Fairer Funding campaign for Lincolnshire, and that does mean everybody in the county who are elected as councillors, because, you know, we do need to try and get that extra funding so that all our services are on a par with other councils and that we are not trying to do more with less money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradwell. Councillor Alexander Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. As a member of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, I think it would be appropriate to bring to the attention of the Council that actually, on the point of the first two initiatives that Councillor Parker has moved, that actually through things like the quarterly performance targets of that committee, those things are already very much considered as part of the work of that committee. We look in particular at things like the number of looked after children who are in training and education. We look at youth offending rates. So I think it is something that is deeply considered by the Council already. And I also want to echo my support for the comments that Councillor Davies made as well, particularly in things about the living wage. You have to remember that small businesses can't always afford to pay people the highest wages, and therefore that leads to a loss of jobs and a loss of small businesses in our county.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marianne Overton.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There is a great deal that needs to be done about the inequalities, and I do agree with the comments made about if we're talking about inequality nationally, about how our council's funding, let's also look about the inequalities within our council area. And I think that does seem to be a perfectly logical argument which we should consider. The national funding, as we know, has hit us very hard, and I'm looking at some of the figures. As we know, I think the children's services will be nationally £2 billion short by 2020. We've had some of the preventative measures, like the early intervention grant, been reduced by some 400 million since 2013. So there are a lot of reductions, and some of that has been hitting the preventative work, which would have normally been our seed corn, if you like, to make sure that we were better on further down the line. So we do need to look at these difficulties. And when you look closely at the actual proposals, examining our current policies to check whether that's reasonable for children's outcomes, not a problem with that. Making sure that the policies are in place, that we're not holding anybody down, they have opportunities, reasonable. And making sure that we try to encourage others in the county to do that too. Can't be anything wrong with that. The living wage employer, I understand there may be difficulties with that. Thinking myself about it, I do think it actually is not unreasonable to be a living wage employer for an organisation like ours, who is trying to set an example. We have, I believe, already put quite a lot of this in place. I think I have discussed this before, and I think our council has looked at this and is already quite a long way down that line. The issues that we have facing our children are wider than these, and I think it was picked up by one of the Councillor Morn about the range of things that you have to get right for children if you want them to really succeed. We know that in our own families. There are so many different aspects to get correct. And having the big things coming down the line, such as the universal credit, as it starts to hit and bite more deeply, which means that somebody going unemployed has to go a whole week with no money at all, and then has to put in a loan, a grant request to get something in advance of another 4 weeks' wait. So there are a lot of things that are making it more difficult for our families. Some of the voluntary sector bodies, like Relate, have fallen by the wayside. So I think all in all, anything we can do now to protect and support children with disabilities also comes into it, also disadvantaged, not socially, but with disabilities. There's a lot to put right, and I would be keen to get us putting a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Councillor Martin Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, like many of these things, I think we're all agreed on an outcome about increasing social mobility, but probably disagreeing on the way that's best achieved. I would agree with Councillor Clark. Kevin, I totally agree with you that actually it is an issue where it does actually add to our campaign about fairer funding. And actually we discussed this report at the Executive of the East Midlands last Friday. And although by its own admission, some of the criteria which are used in this report by the Commission, that they themselves say they are more or less subjective and they could have picked other criteria, but it did sort of suit the argument we want to make. So I'd agree with him on that point. What I don't agree with him on is this constant talk about we are a divided nation. And I think the history of anything has always shown you always get on better if you work together. So I do, and I'm sure he's not one of those people that promote this idea of the nation at war with himself. And I don't believe that myself at all. I think most people in this country and in this county are on the same page, although we may disagree about the best way forward. So I think there are others politically who would actually like to encourage this warlike mentality, and I think that always ends in people going backwards. I think there is, as has been said, there is a financial implication, particularly on bullet point 3, to this proposed policy, because it has been, I think we've estimated, if you look at what the council does, pays and what our suppliers pay, there is potentially a 17% increase in costs embedded it within going along with certainly bullet point 3. I don't think in the times of a declining budget that would be appropriate or sensible. I think we ought to also need to review it in the context of the government increasing the national minimum wage every year substantially. The LGA, on behalf of all local government, including ourselves, has just made a 5.4% increase over 2 years to staff, which the trade union side are currently recognising. And indeed, there is a lot of work going on, as has been said, elsewhere in government and elsewhere to look at how social mobility can be increased. We're lucky in Lincolnshire, of course, that we have grammar schools, which I believe are one of the major drivers of social mobility, as long as those grammar schools do have a fair selection from all sections of society. So I think I don't think we are able to. We will not be supporting this motion. We could spend a lot of time amending it all over the place, but I think to be really be simpler that we just we vote against it. But having said that, I think we are prepared to look at any scrutiny arrangements where I think executive members will review what we're doing in partnership with the scrutiny system, and if there are any areas where the scrutiny would improve what we're doing in terms of social mobility, I'm sure that that Councillor Brockway and Councillor Parker will be able to look at the evidence and do any pieces of work which are necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Eddie Strangle.
Thank you, Chairman. In the motion, it does mention the fair funding campaign, and indeed Councillor Kevin Clark also talked about that, and I believe that Councillor Mrs. Patricia Bradwell has also alluded to the fact that we should support the fair funding campaign. The leader of the council has already said that by supporting Lincoln, perhaps could actually benefit as well. And I know that social mobility is not all about funding. However, it is an important issue. What I would suggest then is Councillor Parker, as a very esteemed and experienced councillor, and Councillor Kevin Clark, who's had a little bit of time under his belt, get together in Grafton House, pull in the Member of Parliament for Lincoln, and indeed the leader of the City of Lincoln Council, and put to them that they should be supporting our fair funding campaign as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Strangwell. Councillor Tom Ashton.
Thank you very much. Not wishing to labour points which have already been said, I would agree, however, that there are many, many noble sentiments expressed in this motion. However, I would add that our first duty as a council is to provide good quality and good value services to the people of this county. In order to set an example on the issue of the minimum wage, the cost of providing services to the people of this county would very likely increase, and it is the people of this county who would have to pay for it, as economies would have to be found elsewhere or council tax would have to rise.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Councillor Matthew Fider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have always been a big believer that the best gateway to social mobility is through education. Now, like Councillor Davies, I was lucky enough myself to go to a grammar school, albeit Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School in Horncastle, and I found that the structure and discipline of this grammar school certainly helped me fulfil at least most of the potential of what I thought I had in myself. I originally wanted to admittedly go to the University of Hull to study physics, but it was the mathematics side of it which unfortunately let me down. But I think it draws back to the point that every child is different and every child should matter. Like myself, not every child is going to grow up to be the rocket scientists that they want to be, but there is a place in society for everyone. Everyone has their roles to play. And I think we need to have an education system that further reflects that. For example, those who are academic, who can do the, your 2 + 2 is 4, -1, that's 3, your quick maths there is one thing, but those who are more attuned to the, your more traditional, your STEM subjects, your science, technologies, maths, those who are more manual with their hands to take up your skilled labour jobs should be given the opportunity to go to educational establishments that allow them to fill their potential in that way. Because every child is fundamentally different. I want to see a society that has that equality of opportunity for those children to fulfil their potentials, to be a functioning part of the fabric of society in which we live. And I ask councillors to remember that children are fundamentally the future, and that we should let their laughter remind us of how we used to be, and we should take their best interests in heart in every decision that we make. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got 2 more people wishing to speak. I'm going to draw a line under it before I ask Councillor Parker to reply if he wishes to. So, Councillor Chris Brewis.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to speak on this one, but after what Matthew Fido did, I had a similar lucky experience going to grammar school in Salisbury, and at the end of what would now be regarded as Year 8, I was so proud of the report I received until I got it home. It said Christopher Brewis has a merry time. I thought it was a compliment, and my parents quickly disavowed me the idea that having a merry time was what I was there for. But I was then lucky to go to University at Durham at the end of 3 years, and my debt was £5. I thought that was very good. However, to me, and it follows on with what Matthew's just said, the key thing to me is if we got the funding for this fair funding that Kensington and Chelsea get, we'd have £200 per property in Lincolnshire more to spend on our residents and their education and everything. And to me, that is, well, it's not the answer, but it is the key issue to it. And to me, the real thing is we've got to change nationally, treating children as products that come through a production line and starting treating them as individuals and build on their strengths. I always tried to do that when I was a teacher. And if I could do one thing, it would be to abolish a restrictive national curriculum and follow some of the things that Matthew said there. Start to build on young people's strengths and encourage them early on to follow that rather than keeping them restrictive and frustrating, narrow national curriculum, I'd abolish it tomorrow and we'd go back to being the best educated country in Europe.
Thank you, Councillor Brewis. Councillor Alison Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I too hadn't intended to speak. I didn't feel I knew enough about this topic. And I'm very interested to see that Boston, for all its failings, comes, as regards Lincolnshire, very much slap bang in the middle, which I think is quite interesting. After a comment by, I think, Councillor Fido, that it was the maths that let him down, I'm a former grammar school, dare I say, maths teacher, perhaps rather than going to Queen Elizabeth at Horncastle, you should have come to Boston Grammar School. Although maybe I'd retired by the time you were old enough to be there. So I'm obviously a great supporter of grammar schools. My teaching has all been in grammar schools, but they are not elitist schools. And I think one of the important things that we have to do, and I'd like to think that we as a council are working towards, is raising aspirations amongst our young people. And I've mentioned before in many different forums the two what I think neglected or Cinderella sectors, where people see it as going into a sink job, namely the agri-foods business and the caring side of employment. And we have to see that our young people do see that there is a positive career progression possible to them, and to make the most of their education, and then to look to see that, yes, there are things, even within Lincolnshire, where you can gradually work up the scale and achieve something for yourself and for your future family and your parents, but also for the benefit of the wider community. And I think that concentrating on what we do within this council is really our way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Parker, would you like to come back?
Certainly. I think I'd want to begin by addressing this question of fairer funding, because it seems to me that if we do get fairer funding, then we've got no strategy for what we're going to do with it. And I'm arguing, and that's the point, about examining our current policies to ensure the Council has in place an integrated strategy. So we get a big chunk of money, 116 million. There's two issues. The first is, does it go straight into roads, for example? Okay, and not even touch, in number terms, some of our important services that are linked to these particular areas. And secondly, why should it go in any way following our current track line into anything that is about combating disadvantage? Because if we put it into the same system, what's going to happen is that places like, for example, Boston in some areas, and South Holland in some areas is just going to be bypassed. Because at the moment, the present way that we allocate resources, if we link resources to outcomes, is not equal and even in its distribution, and that's why we've got the results that we have. If we were targeting precisely spend in relation to combating disadvantage, then we wouldn't see these figures. Why should a new dollop of cash, if it came in, make it any different? All it would do, unless there was a policy in place, would reinforce existing disparities. Now, that's an important argument, and I'm sure you can accept, even if you don't agree with the outcome of it, you can accept that without a policy in place and you get a new chunk of money, it will go in exactly the same way as it is at the moment. I don't think you can dispute that. When it comes to living wage and those that talk about tax and spend, one of the things that I can't have got across is just how poorly performing in terms of living wage Lincolnshire is in terms of other councils. We have 6 out of the 7 council areas in the bottom quartile of all these councils, 325 councils. Bottom quartile is about 75. We've got 6 of ours in the bottom quartile. Now, it can't be for example, that all of the shire authorities like ours are in there, because that would, I mean, if there are 6 or 7 districts in 32 county councils, that's 180 councils, that there's only 75 places. So there must be some shire counties that have got higher wages that are close to, if not beyond, the Living Wage Foundation. So it can't be a rural issue, because there are some rural areas that are doing better than us. And I think that the point that I wanted to make, and I want to get across, that when we're looking at questions about difference, we can see some marked differences within our council at the moment, district council areas. And I'm just asking the question on behalf of the Labour group, why are there such big disparities? And nobody out, we've got 7 district council areas, 16 criteria, total of 114 different sets of criteria, and some of them are markedly different. But nobody's explained to me, for example, and I could pick any example, how is it that South Holland is 6th in the country for the percentage of children eligible for free school meals achieving a good level of development at early stages, 6th in the whole country, and yet East Lindsey is 198th. Nobody can explain to me that. And what I'm asking, really, is this question about how can these be explained. And the first part about it is to do some analysis, and let's then come up with a policy. Now, surely that, even if we lose this vote, which surely seems likely, there are some things, good things, about what's being recommended that can be taken away. Because if we were to ask a question at the next full council meeting is to Councillor Bradwell, as a fair warning, could you explain why there is such marked disparity? Then that would be a point that we could make. Because the one thing I want to finish on, very, very simply, is how can we explain away this question of why North Kesteven came 29th in the whole country out of 325. It's in the same county as Lincolnshire. We know that all the money is being shoveled into London, shoveled in. They take 13 out of the top 20 places. How come North Kesteven succeeds consistently across these areas of performance? Now, that can't be down to funding issues, can it? And those that say it's all a matter of funding, please explain why North Kesteven comes 29th and Lincoln comes 259th. I'll leave it on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. We'll move to the vote now. Can I have all those in favour, please? All those against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Then that's unanimously refused. Lost. Well, it's quite unanimous. Right, that almost concludes today's meeting. Members, can I remind you to collect your post from the pigeonhole after the meeting? And I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a healthy and prosperous New Year. Thank you very much.